Hello, my random viewers, and welcome to Randomly Offensive. Today, we will be continuing the story of genetic blessings in Part 1, Chapter 5. And if you have not seen the previous chapters, they will be linked right here, right now, at the tippity top of the video. If you want to click on them and check them out and then come on back, that's fine with me. Before we hop into the video and into the story, I want to make a quick announcement. I am going to go back to doing Tekken stories, and I will finish Exalu's story. I know that I was doing mostly Tekken stories, and then one genetic blessing chapter in between, but the genetic blessing ideas are just flying in my head, and I'm writing the script as fast as ideas are coming, and I want to tell the story before I lose that motivational drive that makes me want to tell the story. Not only that, but I'm having to give the script for Exalu's final video time to become as good as it needs to become. I don't want to just force it out there just so that there's a story, and I'm having a really hard time making a good finale for Exalu's story, and I really want to get more into telling more of my own stories instead of more Tekken stories, because we're starting to come to an end on Tekken. After Exalu, I have 3 characters left, and then we will be done with Tekken. So I want to get in the habit of doing more of my own stories before I run out of Tekken stories and am forced to do exactly that. So, with that being said, let's continue Genetic Blessings in Part 1, Chapter 5. The Chief sits in the Situation Room of the White House, accompanied by countless world leaders from countries all over the world, with, of course, the President of the United States sitting at the head of the table across from him, and as the Chief cleans the lens of his glasses, the President looks at the Chief. And so, what is the situation with Sector 47 of the G.B.A.? What is so important that you felt the need to demand an audience with all of us? Says the President, as the Chief slowly returns the glasses to his face. He looks up. There has been a situation with Vince. He is becoming a problem, and I fear that my unit, Sector 47 of the G.B.A., has plans to become rogue and rebel against the rest of the G.B.A. and challenge the very mission that the G.B.A. stands to achieve, says the Chief. As the President and the other world leaders lean in, do you have any proof behind your suspicions? Says the President, and the Chief nods as he pulls out a picture and slides it across the table. It is a picture of Jasmine with Vince helping the little girl who has the Mentalist type genetic blessing. And the President looks at this. So they have decided to team up with Vince, says the President. How long have you known about this? He asks. And the Chief simply looks into the eyes of the President. I only found out about it when I received that picture. Seeing her with Vince brings pain to my heart, says the Chief. I was unaware that he even had returned, but now that he has, it seems like he plans on turning the G.B.A. agents against us, says the Chief. The President sliding the picture back. And will you have this under control? And the Chief nods his head. Yes, that is actually why I called you all here today. There is an assassin that I could hire to eradicate
Sector 47 before they get out of control. However, this assassin is a genetic blessing, and I need your permission,
says the chief. And the president, along with all the world leaders, think, debate, and discuss. And they finally give the chief permission to hire this genetic blessing to eradicate his unit of the G.B.A. Meanwhile, the night sky is filled by the screams of one terrified man who is on his knees in the living room of his own beautiful home as he pulls his hair and grabs his skull, screaming in pure, utter fear, begging for mercy, begging for it to stop, with his eyes bulging out of his skull. And as this poor man screams in fear and his body shudders, a woman stands not too far away. A short, petite woman with large librarian-like glasses and blonde hair, as she looks at herself in a mirror and applies lipstick to her lips. She puts the lipstick in a small bag and walks to the terrified man as she leans over, whispering in his ears. It's horrible, isn't it? Feeling this kind of fear, feeling this kind of pain. Unfortunately, many people don't know what it's like to escape such pain, but I have finally given you that gift, she says, and with her green eyes, she blinks, and a hint of gold comes in the pupil of her eye as the man frighteningly stands up and runs into the kitchen and pulls out a handgun from one of the kitchen drawers and quickly shoves it in his mouth, pulling the trigger, blowing his brains all over the kitchen wall. And the woman pulls out a phone and sends an email saying that the target has been eliminated, and she then sees a large sum of money inserted into her account. And as the woman returns to her apartment, she sees an envelope in her door, and as she opens it, she sees that it is a contract with the heads of Vince, Alex, Jim, Jake, Al, and Jasmine, with a very, very large reward. And she looks at it. Oh, I never thought I would get to take out Vince Caballero, she says, as she smiles and neatly folds the contract into her pocket. I will accept this job with a smile on my face, she says to herself as she exits her apartment, with only being there for a matter of seconds. And as she walks through the hallway of the apartment building, she speaks to herself. There is no one more deserving of the fear I have to offer than you, Vince Caballero. And so this woman walks with the bloody ambitions of killing Sector 47 of the G.B.A. and forcing Vince to blow his own brains out. Al, Jake, Jim, Jasmine, Alex, and Vince all relax and are talking in the center of the G.B.A., getting it ready to call it a night after a long day of taking on genetic blessings, while Vince is finally happy at the G.B.A., feeling like for the first time in a long time he is getting to just talk and relate to his friends and Jasmine, as Vince sits quietly smoking his cigarettes while Jake communicates using sign language and gestures. Alex, Jim, Jasmine, and Al all tease each other while Jim is giving Al a bad time for his performance on the field.
"You should have saw it,"
says Jim.
"The second he tried to shoot anything with the cables, he would miss and become shaky. And if anything that wasn't a consumption type showed up, he kept hitting the wrong buttons. I'm shocked that he was ever a police officer, given the fact the only thing he can hit is a bullseye on a round target. The second it moves, well, someone else has got to take over,"
says Jim, with Al smirking at this. I was a really good cop. I wasn't going up against things that could alter reality. I wasn't going up against things that could absorb me, says Al, with Jasmine not encouraging Jim's behavior, but at the same time not defending Al.
"Well, I suppose we should probably start calling it a night,"
says Jim, as he looks at Jake.
"Would you mind locking the place up for me?"
says Jim to Jake, and Jake nods his head, and as he leaves the underground of the G.B.A. and goes into the abandoned building disguise, he begins locking the doors when he hears a voice behind him coming from a woman. "What are the fears of a man who doesn't speak?" the voice says, while the rest of the crew are down in the G.B.A. Al gets up out of the couch. "So, where's the chief?" says Al. "He hasn't been here all day." And Vince just looks at Al with serious eyes, but refuses to say anything as he continues smoking his cigarette, and Jasmine simply responds, he had to deal with some governmental officials and, I don't know, give a job performance report or something. I don't know. He basically just makes sure that we stay in business, she says. And so Al shrugs his shoulders. "All right. Well, I suppose it's time to hit the sack," he says, as Alex gets ready to shut down her computer, and she looks at one of the monitors that displays the security footage and becomes terrified as she quickly looks at Vince. Guys, there's something really bad about to go down," she says. They all run to Alex to see what she's talking about, and Vince, looking at the monitor, sees the woman with blonde hair and glasses, with her hands gently on each side of Jake's face, gently speaking to him, and Vince begins stepping back.
"Oh no,"
he says, with Jasmine looking at the monitor. Who is that?" she says.
That is Caroline,"
responds Vince, with the group looking at him. "Who the hell is Caroline?" says Al, with Vince struggling for words. Alex answers, "Caroline is an assassin and is a mentalist type genetic blessing. She can make you face your greatest fears, and oftentimes, more often than not, her targets commit suicide because of facing their fears, she says. And Jim, quickly panicking,
No. I have to go save Jake.
he says as he begins to run, but Vince grabs him by the arm and uses his force field around his hand to create a grasp that Jim cannot be released from.
What are you doing, Vince? I have to go save my friend,
says Jim. However, Vince looks back. There is no saving Jake right now, says Vince. What we must do now is make a plan. Jake will be able to handle facing his fears temporarily. We must save him once she is taken care of. She's a mentalist type, right? Says Al. We can just use loud noises. As soon as she exits that elevator, we can just use loud noises, he says, and Vince looks back at him.
I'm afraid that's not going to work. I would be shocked if she didn't have earplugs or music drowning out any sound that you could cause,
he says. And Jasmine looks at him. Wait a second. How do you know her, and how does she know the weaknesses of her genetic blessing? She says. And Vince, no to responding, lets go of Jim, trusting that he will stay, and lights up a cigarette.
She used to work for me, and then she became something that I could no longer be a part of,
he says.
I don't know how we're gonna beat her, but we are going to beat her,
says Vince, with Alex, for the first time, doubting Vince. Are you sure? Are you actually sure that you can beat her? Says Alex as Vince looks at her.
Don't question me, Alex. I have never led you astray before, have I? I'm never wrong and I have no limits. But for now, I think the best thing to do is separate.
Al, looking at Vince, that seems like the worst thing to do is to separate, he says, with Jasmine agreeing with Al. We're not separating. We gotta take her on together, she says, and Vince looking back.
Really? Let her get us all at once and make us all face our greatest fears so she can watch us slaughter each other, thinking that we are some kind of beast or monster. No, we must protect ourselves from ourselves,
says Vince, with Jim surprisingly siding with Vince.
I agree. If she can make us face our fears, there's a good chance that we'll hallucinate and kill each other. We must isolate ourselves,
says Jim. And so they all scatter, going into their own rooms, waiting for the woman, Caroline, to approach them. Caroline stands watching Jake's body enter a trance as his mind sends him to the G.B.A. in rubble, with Jim, Jasmine, and Al lying in the rubble as nothing more than corpses. And as he looks at the dead bodies of his friends, he hears footsteps, and as he looks in the direction there walks towards him Vince with a demonic face.
You never could speak to your friends. You never could warn them of the horrors that I would bring, of the pain I would cause. And if you could just have said a single word, you may have been able to save their lives,
says the illusion of Vince as Jake grabs his spear and hits the button to make it frosted and iced. He stabs Vince, however, it has no effect, and he stabs Vince again and again, while Vince laughs.
You will never stop the fate that your friends are destined to have. You will never be able to save the lives of those whom you love,
says Vince, as Caroline begins walking away with a smile, with Jake now trembling. Your fear is a simple one, she says. The fear of losing your friends due to a man that you can't trust. Of course, I would never trust Vince. I can't say that your fear is invalid, she says as she walks into the elevator and rides it down, and as she enters the G.B.A, she sees that it is empty. Well, it seems they have decided to hide away. Any plans you have, Vince, are not going to work. Not on me, she says as she fixes her glasses on her face and begins walking through the G.B.A. And Caroline begins walking through the G.B.A. until she's approached the hallway of where all of their bedrooms lie, and she opens the first door and walks in, with Al standing next to the door with his spear ready, and he hits the button and releases a loud whistling noise that echoes through the halls, and Jasmine, Jim, Alex, and Vince can hear it, with Vince smiling.
Very good try, Al. Very good try,
he says to himself, and Caroline stands staring at Al, unaffected, and Al realizes that Vince was right. Caroline has come prepared, and Caroline blinks her eyes at Al with a golden light coming from her pupil. Al feels himself losing control of his own body as Caroline gently puts her hand on his cheek. What are your hopes and dreams? What are your fears? She says in a loving, caring manner, with her hand gently on Al's cheek, as Al loses full control of his own body and thoughts. He wakes up in a world that is dark and cloudy, and the streets empty, with a large tower in the center that has a large clock and multiple speakers, and the speakers begin to erupt with a voice. The time is now 8 a.m. and curfew has been lifted for 4 hours. Go to your designated areas now, says the speakers, as large groups of people exit their homes in in incredibly organized fashion as they all walk to their designated sites to where they must work, and they are watched and guided by armed guards. As Al watches this, what the hell is this? He says. Well, says Caroline's voice, nothing more than an echo, it would appear that your greatest fear is martial law. Your greatest fear is not having freedom, she says. And Al looks up. Is that it? That is what's gonna make me commit suicide? He says. But then, with a blink of an eye, he finds himself in the very same suits as the rest of the armed guards, with a gun, as an old man falls and stumbles out of line. Al's body points the gun at the old man, with Al yelling, "Get back in line, or I'll pull the trigger," he says, with Al's thoughts yelling at his body. Wait, what? No, we don't do this. This isn't me, says Al. Don't you dare pull that trigger on that old man. He tripped, he says. But it was far too late. As the old man tries to argue, Al pulls the trigger, putting a bullet in the old man's head, killing him. And Al does not know what to make of this. All right, this isn't funny. This isn't cool, he says. And the voice responds, no, this is not funny, nor is this cool. Your biggest fear is living a life where you enforce laws that have no right being enforced. Your greatest fear is not being able to live with yourself, and by time you have lived the life that you are about to live, you will have no choice but to want to slice your throat. And I envy you. So many people can't escape their pain, but you will be able to escape the pain you're about to feel whenever you want, she says, as Al screams back into the sky. No, whatever you make me do, anything you make me do that makes me hate myself, I will hold on to that, and the second I wake up, Caroline, I will take it out on you, he says, as Caroline giggles. I am not making you do anything. Your fear is gonna make you do all of it, she says, as she releases her hand from Al, with him still in the trance. Well, that's 2 down. I just have to wait for them to kill themselves off. Now, on to the next one, she says. Caroline walks into the second room, where Jasmine sits on her bed comfortably as she looks at Caroline. So, says Jasmine, you have come to make me face my greatest fears, have you? She says as she stands up, and Caroline nods her head. Yes, I am here to make you feel what I once felt. I am here to make you feel what so many people feel, but unlike me, and unlike so many others, I'm also gonna provide you an escape, she says, and Jasmine smiles at her. I won't need an escape. I'm not gonna run from my fears. I'm going to confront them, and I thank you for the opportunity to do so, says Jasmine, as Caroline gently puts her hands on the face of Jasmine and blinks her eyes, igniting the golden light from her pupil. Then Jasmine enters a trance as she enters her greatest fears. And Jasmine finds herself sitting in the G.B.A., but the G.B.A. from 10 years ago, when she was married to Vince, working alongside Jim, Jake, and another man by the name of Paul. As the chief sat in his office sipping on his whiskey, Jasmine looks up. "You're gonna make me relive my past, is that it? You think that's my greatest fear?" she says. And Caroline speaks. No. You have always been the leader, haven't you? That is your title. You have always been the one in control. However, ever since you've had your heart broken, it appears you aren't much of a leader anymore, and you've been losing that control, and it scares you. But how scared must you be for something to be your greatest fear? Asks Caroline as Jasmine looks at her desk, which was at the time organized, clean, with everything in its rightful spot, completely different than how it is now. A cluttered mess. And she sees Vince remembering why she had fallen in love with him, as he is just as organized, just as calm. And she remembers the mission that they had that day as she pulls out a picture of the folder of their targets, which were a group of teenagers, and it clicks in her brain. That's it, she says to herself. That is why Vince decided we were wrong. This is why Vince left. He could never bring himself to kill a child or a teenager. This was the day it all went to shit, she says to herself, looking back at the memory of Vince working at his desk. And the memories fly past her as Vince turned on the G.B.A. to protect the teenagers, taking one of the killed teens' genetic blessing orb and accepting it and fighting Jasmine, Jim, Jake, and Paul, with Vince eventually killing Paul and Jim having to watch his best friend die, and Jasmine having to watch one of her teammates lose a life to her husband. And the memories continue flying past her, and then she remembers meeting Al, and she remembers getting to know Al, and all the signs of Al having the same weaknesses and the same compassion that Vince has is all there within Al. And Jasmine thinks to herself, what was I thinking? I set myself up for this to happen again, she says to herself. And Caroline begins speaking. Yes, your need for control is no more. You no longer have control. You just want someone in the world to show you a different way. That's all you've ever wanted. Your greatest fear isn't losing control. Your greatest fear is becoming a monster yourself, losing your very own soul, says Caroline. As Jasmine looks up, I won't let that happen, she says, with Caroline giggling. Oh? And how will you not let that happen? What if one day, Caroline says, but then does not continue as her point is proven as Al is walking up to Jasmine and then grabs his chest and falls to the ground. Jasmine runs up to Al. What's going on? What's happening? It's called a heart attack, says Caroline. What happens if the only people that can keep your soul intact die? Caroline asks as Jasmine watches Al's life leave his body. Jasmine then realizes that facing her fear was going to be much harder than she thought, and Caroline takes her hands off of the face of Jasmine. 3 down, she says as she leaves Jasmine's room and enters another one. And there stands Jim with a bottle of beer as he chugs it down and throws it on the ground, shattering it.
Alrighty. Let's get this over with so that I can go save my friend Jake,
says Jim as he walks to Caroline.
Do what you gotta do,
Jim says intimidatedly, and Caroline looks at Jim. Very interesting. You almost seem excited, she says as she fixes her glasses on her face once more and blinks her eyes, shining a golden light as she puts her hands on the face of Jim, and Jim enters a trance, and it becomes his turn. As Jim enters his trance, he wakes standing at the gravesite of Paul.
Is that your game?
Says Jim.
You're gonna force me to mourn my friend? No problem,
he says as he kneels down and puts his hands together in prayer and mourns and prays over the grave of his old lost friend. And Caroline then speaks. This is the friend you lost, isn't it? The man you couldn't save, the man you failed to protect, all because of Vince, she says. And Jim ignores her and continues praying, and then when he is finished, he stands up and looks into the sky.
Vince did what he had to do. It's not easy eradicating genetic blessings, he says. It's one of the hardest things that a person has to do. Killing those who haven't done anything wrong yet. Killing those that don't deserve it, all because the greater good demands us to do so. If we don't, they might turn out like you, says Jim. Vince has his convictions and I will respect it, but I will never agree with it. So, is this it? Is this my fear?
Says Jim, and Caroline laughs. No, that part's yet to come.
Well then, stop wasting my time and make it happen already,
says Jim. As you wish, responds Caroline, as Jim then appears in the middle of nowhere in a dark forest land with a giant black wolf standing before him with razor-sharp teeth. Jim looks at the wolf.
This is no fear of mine,
says Jim. As he stares into the eyes of the wolf, he then hears a twig snap behind him. As he quickly turns around, he sees Jasmine, Jake, Vince, Al. the chief, and even Paul, all standing behind him.
I see,
Says Jim.
you're gonna force me to protect my friends, is that it? Well, I won't allow them to die,
He says, as he gets ready to take on this wolf.
I already stand between the threat and my friends, so bring it on,
Yells Jim. And the wolf then charges at a tremendous speed, and as Jim goes to take on the wolf just goes through him as if Jim is a ghost, and goes straight to Jasmine and the others. The wolf attacks the group with ferocity and viciousness, and its first victim is Jasmine as it bites into her stomach with her screaming and begins tearing her very flesh off her body. And Jim rushes there to try to tackle the wolf off of Jasmine, but his body just goes through the wolf again as if he's nothing more than a ghost. And he tries to grab the hand of Jasmine, but he can't, and she stares at him. You can't protect me, she says. You aren't capable of protecting any of us, she says as she stares into the eyes of Jim. And so Jim stays on his knees, knowing what he is about to be forced to witness. He looks into the sky.
You better hope you break me,
He says,
you better hope this works, because if it doesn't, I'm gonna snap every bone in your body, young lady,
says Jim. And Caroline takes her hands off of Jim. And as she turns around to exit the door, she looks back. That is a hell of a fear, she says. Losing everyone that's close to you has got to hurt. And Caroline walks out, closing the door behind her. As Caroline enters another room, she sees computers and monitors all over, with Alex sitting in an office chair, sipping a frappuccino, working on her computer. And as Alex turns around, you know, I have tried to hack into anything you might have on your person, says Alex. It appears you don't have any headphones blaring music that can drown out harmful sounds, says Alex as she walks to Caroline. No, nothing like that, responds Caroline. And so Alex runs her fingers through the hairs of Caroline as she pushes the hair back to look for an earplug. However, there's nothing in Caroline's ears. And Caroline just looks at Alex with a smile. I've overcome that weakness, she says. Once you have faced your fears and overcome your fears, you are capable of doing anything, she continues. I was once a child like yourself, she says, with Alex looking angrily. I'm not a child. I'm not a kid anymore, says Alex, with Caroline only smiling at her. No, you are a child, and I was one too. However, I didn't get to enjoy being a kid. The world has always been a scary place for me, but then I was given a genetic blessing that allowed men to feel the same pain they gave me. to allow women the same pain they allow to be brought to their children. And now, I am able to rid the planet of anyone that could make a little girl like yourself scared again, she says, and pokes Alex in the chest. I will not hurt you, and I will not make you face your fears. You're young enough to where you don't have to do that yourself, she says with a smile, and walks out. And as she closes the door, she snaps off the handle so that Alex cannot open it, and walks into the last room. And there stands Vince, smoking a cigarette calmly. You're next, says Caroline. However, Vince just pulls out his pack of cigarettes and pulls out a cigarette and hands it to her, and so she takes it and puts it in her mouth as he lights it for her.
Before we get started, how about we catch up? It's been a while since I've seen you,
he says. And so Caroline sits on the edge of his bed with him sitting next to her. So, what are you doing, Vince? She says to him, and Vince just looks at her.
What do you mean? You mean right now? I'm smoking a cigarette and talking to someone I haven't talked to in a while.
He responds, No, that's not what I mean. I mean, why are you at the G.B.A? Why are you helping out the G.B.A? They have been hunting us down for thousands of years. They're the enemy, she responds. And Vince just smiles as he inhales from his cigarette and exhales a large cloud of smoke.
The man, the god of the genetic blessings, the most powerful genetic blessing, is the chief, the head of the G.B.A, and he is using it to take over the world. He's using it to eradicate any genetic blessing that may overthrow him once he has finally become ruler of Earth,
responds Vince, and Caroline looks at him with a smile. Really? So you are saving the world, she says. That's kind of a big leap from protecting children.
Well, when stakes are high,
responds Vince. And not even smoking halfway through her cigarette, she puts it out and stands up. I didn't come here to catch up. I came here to collect a bounty and assassinate my target, says Caroline, as Vince looks at her.
Really? Well, what are you waiting for then? Wouldn't be the first time you've betrayed me,
he says, with Caroline now getting angry as she fixes her glasses. Betray you? That's rich. You betrayed me. I saw a man that needed to be killed. I saw a man that was about to do horrible things to someone who did not deserve those horrible things, and I stopped it from happening. And Vince then stands up, blowing the smoke from his cigarette in Caroline's face.
You do not get to make that decision. You do not get to punish a crime before it has been committed, says Vince. That's not how justice works.
Oh, but I believe it is how it should work. If someone's about to do something, that is the time to stop them. But you've never understood that. You've nothing if not consistent, says Caroline. I am not going to argue with you, Vince. I have a contract to fulfill, she says as she puts her hand on Vince's face, blinks her eyes, and a golden light comes from her pupil as Vince is put in a trance.
Alrighty, here we go,
he says to himself. Vince wakes up in a world where genetic blessings and humans coexist and live in peace and harmony as true equals. However, there are wanted posters of Vince, textbooks teaching children of the evil genetic blessing, where all pain and all turmoil were to be blamed on him. And this genetic blessing went by the name of Vince Caballero, with politicians comparing other politicians to Vince, as his name has been turned into a derogatory term, and Vince laughs at this.
This isn't a fear, this is a goal, says Vince. This is what would happen, this is what will happen if I am successful at saving the world. I'll be seen as a monster, I will be seen as a villain, and being alone will be the price I pay,
he says, with Caroline walking up next to him. This is what would happen if you were successful, she says. You would end up being alone. And you don't want to be alone, do you? She says as she looks at Vince.
I don't think I'd mind it,
he responds.
I'm sure it'll be hard. I've always enjoyed having a family with the G.B.A. I've always enjoyed having company, but being alone's a small price to pay to be a hero,
says Vince. And he then wakes up to the world being in turmoil, destroyed, and in the middle of a war between genetic blessings and humanity, with the chief in charge of every genetic blessing on the planet, and all his friends have perished as he looks at gravestones with all of their names on it. Al, Jasmine, Jim, Jake.
Well, that's okay,
he says.
If I fail, this is what will happen. I'm aware of this,
he continues, with Caroline once again walking up to his side. And isn't it funny how even when you fail, it's the same outcome, she says, with Vince looking at her through the corner of his eye.
What do you mean?
Well, you'll end up alone. It seems like no matter what, you are going to end up alone, she says.
I know what you're doing, Caroline,
responds Vince.
I am afraid of being alone, but it is inevitable. It is going to happen, no matter what. And I've already accepted that fate. I've already faced that fear.
And Caroline begins to smile. Yes, you have. However, what exactly allowed you? She says, with Vince still looking at her, but only through the corner of his eye. What allowed you to be able to conquer that fear? What has allowed you to continue living on even though you know you're gonna end up alone and without anybody? The answer is so simple, she says to herself, with Vince now squeezing his fists and tightening his knuckles.
Don't you dare,
he says. But it is too late, as he then wakes up in a different location, a few years into the past, on a very familiar road, looking at a very familiar house, with the scream of a little girl as she is beaten by her father, and Vince tightening his knuckles even more, with Caroline standing by his side. Yeah, she's the one, isn't she? Says Caroline, with Vince, too angry to speak, walks into the house and sees a father beating a young girl as he catches the fist of the man. He then uses his force field to create a spear in his hand and stabs the man through his chest and slams him to the ground and looks at the little girl.
I am sorry you had to see that,
he says,
but I was afraid he was going to kill you.
And the little girl, barely being able to open her swollen eyes, barely being able to move her broken legs, just nods as if she was okay with what Vince had done, and he picks her up and walks away with her. As he takes her into a hospital, they give her urgent care, and he sits patiently in the waiting room, waiting for her to be okay. And when the doctor comes out, he tells her that the little girl is fine and that he can leave. However, he stays at the hospital and stays, and the second he sees the police showing up, he knows it is because they found the dead body of the little girl's abusing father, and he runs to the hospital room with the little girl and looks at her.
Do you trust me?
He says, and the little girl nods her head.
I can take care of you. I can protect you. But they're gonna take you back to a family that's not gonna care about you. They're gonna take you and put you in a home that will not care about you. And I care about you,
he says. And the little girl just continues nodding her head. And so he picks her up and looks at her.
What is your name?
He says. Alex, responds the little girl. And then the little girl vanishes, with Caroline standing next to Vince once again. You kidnapped her, she says, with Vince getting even angrier.
I did not kidnap her. I saved her. I did what needed to be done,
he says, with Caroline smirking. Yeah, I'm pretty sure what that was kidnapping. But regardless, she has always been there for you through thick and thin. She has never left your side. She has always supported you. She's always been there for you. Hell, she has been taking care of you more than you've been taking care of her, says Caroline, as Vince is overflowing with rage and anger. Just hold on to all that rage. Hold on to all that anger, says Caroline. You are gonna need it, because it's you're gonna start getting scared real soon, she says, as Vince wakes up once again in a different location, this time in a cabin in the middle of the woods, and Vince walks to the cabin looking for Caroline.
Where are you? What is this? What are you about to have me do?
He says, but no response, so he opens the door, and what he sees is something that truly terrifies him. As Vince walks into the cabin, there is a table in the center with the lopped off head of Alex sitting on a plate on the center of the table, with Vince running to the table and then falling on his knees.
This isn't real. This is all fake,
he says,
and this is cruel.
He continues as Caroline has her voice echoing through the cabin. This is fake, yes, and this is also cruel, but it is your fear. And do you want to know why you fear this? It's because you know it's gonna happen, and it's because of you. Alex is going to die because of you. The second you brought her into your life, you have put her in endless danger, and you plan on taking on the most powerful genetic blessing. You plan on fighting a war with this little girl being your right-hand man, your right-hand gal. Do you honestly think she's gonna make it out alive? You're going to kill Alex, says Caroline, with Vince shaking, and now Vince feels fear. His greatest fear is losing Alex, and now he's forced to face it. However, Vince is then released from the hold. As he wakes up, he sees a knife in the side of Caroline, with Caroline screaming, and as she falls to the ground, there stands Alex with blood on her hands, and her hands are trembling. You should not have underestimated me, she says to Caroline. You shouldn't have thought that you didn't have to hurt me. I'm capable, she says, and Vince, ignoring the whimpers and the pain and screams from Caroline, walks up to Alex and gives her a giant hug.
I am never going to allow you to be hurt,
he says.
I'm going to protect you for as long as I can. I promise you.
And Alex, realizing that his fear had something to do with losing her, becomes warmed and hugs him back. As the rest of the G.B.A. are released from their pain, Jim wakes up, Al wakes up, and Jasmine wakes up. And by time they make it into Vince's room, Caroline has managed to crawl and limp her way out of the G.B.A. But Vince didn't care to stop her. All he cared about was holding Alex and not letting go. As Jasmine looks at Al, Al falls on his knees. I did horrible things, Al said. I am a horrible person. And Jasmine puts her hand on Al. You did not do horrible things. None of that was real, Al, she says. None of it was real. And Jim, sitting on Vince's bed,
that was a really shitty experience,
he says. Jake, finally coming down into the elevator, entering, sobbing in tears, walks into the room and hugs everybody. And they realize that their greatest fears are something that they never want to come true. Not a single one of them are willing to go to bed or even try to fall asleep after this experience. They sit in the middle of the G.B.A. However, they are not discussing or relaxing, they're just sitting in silence. As the chief walks in and sees all of them, he walks through.
I'm shocked you guys are still awake. How has it been while I was gone?
He says, with Vince glaring at the chief.
Well, an assassin was hired to kill us, he says. You wouldn't have any idea who might have wanted us dead, would you?
Says Vince, with the chief glaring back at him.
Of course not, but I'll start looking into it right away. I'm glad you are all alive,
he says as he walks into his office and pours himself a glass of whiskey and waits for a few hours. As he drinks his whiskey, he cracks open the door of his office, and the group had finally fallen asleep, however, in the same spots they were when he came back. And he receives an email from Caroline saying that she had failed, and so he tells her to meet him at a park. And as the chief walks to the park, he sees Caroline nursing the stab wound.
You have failed, it would appear,
he says, and Caroline just looks at him. So, what are you gonna do about it? She says.
I'm going to kill you. I knew you were going to fail, but I wanted to see how powerful you are. And in my perfect world that I am building, I cannot allow someone like you to exist,
says the chief.
It's a shame that they couldn't kill you, though.
And Caroline then walking angrily to the chief. So you set me up, did you? You know, I have fears of my own. I fear that I will never be able to have my revenge on my father for the things he did to me. And I'm not gonna allow you to kill me before that opportunity has come my way, she says as she puts her hand on the cheek of the chief and blinks her eyes, sending a gold light out of her pupil. However, nothing happens. What's going on? She says, and the chief just stares at her.
I am an old genetic blessing. Do you honestly think that there is a fear I have yet to overcome? Do you honestly think that there's a weakness that I have? I am no one to take lightly, young lady,
he says to her as she keeps her hand on the cheek of the old man and blinks again, sending another gold light in through her pupil. However, again, nothing happens.
Stop it, child. Your time has come.
And Caroline drops to her knees. No, that's not fair. That's not fair, she says. And in the distance, you can hear the screams of Caroline and bones snapping. And the chief walks out of the park.
I'm sorry, Caroline. My perfect world has no room for traumatized trash like yourself,
he says to himself as he walks back to the G.B.A. to finish the plan that he has started. And that is part 1, chapter 5, and I will be continuing Genetic Blessings in part 1, chapter 6. If this video is too long, absolutely let me know in the comments. If I need to make them shorter, I can. If you guys have listened for this long, thank you so much. And if you guys enjoyed, please do consider hitting the like and subscribe button. Take care of yourselves, don't get hit by a meteor, and bye.